The winter of 1885 had come early to Redemption Creek, and it came with a vengeance. Snow blanketed the Montana Territory in layers so thick that fence posts disappeared entirely, leaving only white mounds to mark where civilization ended and wilderness began. The pine forests that crowded the foothills of Thunder Peak stood like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with ice, creaking under the weight of nature's burden. Caroline Hart stood at the window of her father's house, watching the snow fall in thick, lazy flakes. At 23, she had her mother's delicate features, high cheekbones, a small straight nose, and eyes the color of summer sky, but her spirit was all her father's, stubborn, determined, and unwilling to bend to anyone's will but her own. "Caroline, step away from that window and come help me with supper," called Martha, their housekeeper, from the kitchen. "In a moment," Caroline replied, her breath fogging the glass. She was thinking about the Millers, a family that lived near the base of Thunder Peak. Their youngest, little Sarah, had been sick with fever for 3 days now. Doc Morrison had left medicine with Caroline yesterday, trusting her to deliver it since he'd been called away to tend to a difficult birth at the Sullivan Ranch. "Storm's getting worse," Martha observed, appearing beside her with flour-dusted hands. "Your father won't like you going out in this weather." Caroline turned from the window, her jaw set in that familiar way that made her look exactly like Marshall Hart when he was about to arrest someone. "Father's away at the county seat until tomorrow. Besides, Sarah Miller needs that medicine. What kind of person would I be if I let a little snow stop me?" Martha shook her head, knowing that tone all too well. Once Caroline Hart set her mind to something, there was no talking her out of it. It was a trait that had served her well in some ways. She was the only unmarried woman in town who regularly taught at the schoolhouse, helped at the church, and assisted Doc Morrison with his rounds. But it also worried those who loved her. "At least wait until morning," Martha tried one last time. "By morning, that fever could turn dangerous. I know the trail well enough, and Buttercup's sure-footed." Caroline was already reaching for her heavy wool cloak, the one her mother had made years ago. "I'll be back before dark." The barn was warm with the heat of horses and hay. Buttercup, her Palomino mare, nickered softly as Caroline entered. The horse was a gift from her father 3 years ago, chosen for her gentle temperament and steady gait. Caroline saddled her quickly, her fingers working the familiar buckles and straps with practiced ease. "Just you and me, girl," she whispered, stroking the mare's neck. "We'll make this quick." She tied the medicine securely in her saddlebag, along with some bread and preserves Martha had insisted she take for the Millers. The snow was falling harder now, but Caroline had ridden this trail dozens of times. 5 miles to the Miller cabin, 5 miles back. She could do it with her eyes closed. The first mile went smoothly enough. Buttercup picked her way carefully along the trail, her hooves finding purchase despite the deepening snow. Caroline pulled her scarf higher, covering her nose and mouth against the bitter wind that had begun to pick up. The familiar landmarks, the lightning-struck pine, the creek crossing, the peculiar boulder that looked like a sleeping bear, were all but invisible under their white shroud. By the second mile, Caroline realized her mistake. This wasn't just winter weather. This was a blizzard building. The wind howled through the trees, driving snow horizontally across her path. Visibility dropped to mere feet. Buttercup snorted nervously, tossing her head. "Easy, girl," Caroline soothed, though her own heart was beginning to race. "We're almost there." But they weren't almost there. Somewhere in the white chaos, she had lost the trail. The familiar landmarks were gone, swallowed by the storm. She tried to turn back, but the wind and snow had erased their tracks within minutes. Every direction looked the same, white, endless, terrifying. Buttercup struggled on, but Caroline could feel the mare's exhaustion. The snow was knee-deep now, each step a monumental effort. Caroline's fingers and toes had long since gone numb. Despite her thick gloves and boots, ice crystals formed on her eyelashes, making it hard to see. Then it happened. Buttercup's hoof found a hidden depression under the snow, perhaps a rabbit hole or a gap between rocks. The mare stumbled, whinnying in distress. Caroline tried to steady her, but the combination of ice, slope, and momentum was too much. Horse and rider tumbled sideways, sliding down an embankment Caroline hadn't even known was there. The world became a confusion of white sky and white ground, the harsh scrape of rock through snow, Buttercup's frightened cries. Caroline felt herself thrown from the saddle, tumbling separately from her horse. Her head struck something hard, a rock or a tree, and stars exploded across her vision. When the world stopped spinning, Caroline found herself at the bottom of a ravine, half buried in snow. Buttercup was nowhere to be seen. She tried to call out, but her voice was weak, stolen by the wind. She attempted to stand, but her left ankle screamed in protest, and darkness crowded the edges of her vision. "Father," she whispered, though she knew he was miles away, probably warm and safe in the county courthouse. She thought of Martha, who would worry when she didn't return. She thought of the Millers, of little Sarah who needed the medicine that was now lost somewhere in the snow with Buttercup. The cold was seductive, inviting her to close her eyes, to rest just for a moment. Caroline fought against it, but she was so tired, so very tired. Miles away, in a cabin hidden deep in the pine forests of Thunder Peak's northern face, Elias Crow was checking his trap lines. At 32, he had the build of a man who lived by physical labor, broad shoulders, strong hands, a body made lean and hard by necessity rather than choice. His dark hair hung past his collar, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face, making his gray eyes all the more striking in contrast. He had lived alone in these woods for 3 years now, ever since the incident in Billings that had made him a wanted man. The cabin was small but solid, built with his own hands from logs he'd cut and shaped. It was a good life, if a lonely one. The mountain provided what he needed: game to eat, furs to trade carefully with the few trappers who didn't ask questions, and, most importantly, isolation from a world that wanted him dead for a crime he didn't commit. The storm had driven most animals to shelter, leaving his traps empty. Elias was about to head back when something caught his eye, a flash of color against the white, yellow fabric. His hand moved instinctively to the Colt at his hip, a habit born of 3 years of looking over his shoulder. But as he approached, he realized it wasn't a threat. It was a woman, half buried in snow, unconscious. Her lips were blue with cold, ice crystals in her blonde hair. She wore a fine wool cloak, too fine for a trapper's wife or a frontier woman. This was a town lady, and she was dying. Elias didn't hesitate. He scooped her up, surprised by how light she was, how fragile. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he could barely feel her breath against his neck. The storm was worsening. He had to get her inside quickly. The journey back to his cabin was a blur of wind and snow. Elias held the woman tight against his chest, using his body to shield her from the worst of the storm. By the time he kicked open his cabin door, his arms were burning with exhaustion, but she was still breathing. The cabin's interior was sparse but warm. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Elias laid the woman on his bed, the only bed, and began the delicate work of saving her life. First, the wet clothes had to go. Elias worked with clinical efficiency, trying not to think about the impropriety of undressing an unconscious woman. He had seen death by freezing before. Modesty was a luxury the dying couldn't afford. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, then built up the fire until the cabin was almost stifling. Her ankle was swollen, probably sprained in whatever accident had landed her in that ravine. Elias wrapped it carefully with strips torn from an old shirt. There was a bump on her head too, but the bleeding had stopped. He heated water and made a weak tea from willow bark, good for pain and fever. If she woke up to drink it. If she woke up. Elias pulled his only chair next to the bed and settled in to wait. He studied her face in the firelight. Young, maybe early 20s, with the kind of delicate beauty that belonged in a parlor, not a mountain blizzard. Her clothes, now drying by the fire, were well made. The cloak alone probably cost more than he'd seen in years. Who was she? What was a woman like this doing out in such weather? The hours passed slowly. Elias fed the fire, checked her breathing, watched for signs of frostbite. Her color was returning, the blue fading from her lips. Once, she stirred, murmuring something he couldn't catch. He found himself leaning closer, caught by the sound of her voice. It had been 3 years since he'd been this close to a woman. 3 years since he'd spoken to anyone for more than a brief trade. The isolation had been his choice, his protection. But now, watching this stranger fight for life in his bed, Elias felt the weight of his loneliness like a physical thing. Outside, the storm raged on, sealing them in together. Whatever tomorrow would bring, questions, fears, the possibility of discovery, would have to wait. For now, there was only the fire, the storm, and the steady rise and fall of her breath telling him she was still alive. Elias Crow, outlaw and exile, kept his vigil through the night, guarding a woman whose name he didn't even know, whose presence in his cabin could mean the end of everything he'd built here. But as he watched her sleep, something stirred in his chest that he'd thought dead forever, a flicker of warmth that had nothing to do with the fire, and everything to do with the way her hair caught the light like spun gold. Caroline woke to unfamiliar warmth and the scent of wood smoke. For a moment, she lay still, trying to piece together where she was. The last thing she remembered was snow, endless, suffocating snow, and Buttercup falling. And then, nothing. She opened her eyes slowly. Above her were rough-hewn log beams, not the white-painted ceiling of her room at home. The bed beneath her was narrow and hard, nothing like her feather mattress. Panic fluttered in her chest as she turned her head, taking in the sparse cabin, a stone fireplace with a healthy fire, a rough table and single chair, shelves lined with supplies, and, her breath caught, a Colt revolver hanging on the wall. "You're awake!" The deep voice made her jump. A man rose from the chair beside the bed, and Caroline instinctively pulled the blankets higher. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and a full beard that obscured most of his face. But his eyes, gray as winter sky, held no threat, only a watchful wariness. "Don't be frightened," he said, though he made no move to come closer. "Found you in the snow yesterday, near frozen to death." "Yesterday?" Caroline tried to sit up, then gasped as pain shot through her ankle. "Best stay still," the man advised. "Your ankle's twisted pretty bad, no bones broken, far as I can tell, but it needs rest." "Who are you?" Caroline's voice came out as a croak. "Where am I?" The man moved to the fireplace, ladling water from a pot into a tin cup. "Name's Elias. You're in my cabin, about 5 miles north of Thunder Peak." He approached slowly, like she was a spooked deer, and offered her the cup. "Small sips. You've been out for near 18 hours. Caroline accepted the water gratefully, using the moment to study him over the rim of the cup. Despite his rough appearance, his hands were clean, his movements careful. When she finished drinking, he took the cup back and retreated to a safe distance. "My horse," she said suddenly. "Buttercup." "No sign of her when I found you. Sorry." His expression softened slightly. "Storm probably drove her to shelter somewhere. Horses are smarter than people sometimes." "I have to go," Caroline said, attempting again to rise. "My father will be worried. The whole town will be looking for me." "Ma'am, I don't think you understand." Elias moved to the window, pulling aside the heavy cloth that served as a curtain. "Take a look." Caroline gasped. The world outside was white, completely, utterly white. Snow was still falling heavily, and the wind drove it in horizontal sheets. She couldn't see more than a few feet beyond the window. "Been coming down like that all night," Elias said. "We're snowed in good and proper, even if your ankle was fine. Which it ain't. You wouldn't make it 10 yards in that." The reality of her situation crashed over Caroline like a cold wave. She was trapped in a cabin with a stranger, a man with a gun on his wall and the look of someone who'd been living rough. Her wet clothes were nowhere to be seen, which meant her face burned with the implications. "Your clothes are drying by the fire," Elias said, apparently reading her thoughts. "Had to get you warm. Would have let you freeze otherwise." His tone was matter of fact, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. "There's a shirt and some pants there when you're ready. They'll be too big, but they're clean and dry." "Thank you," Caroline managed, because what else could she say? This man had saved her life, improper or not. An awkward silence stretched between them. Elias busied himself at the fireplace, stirring something in a pot that smelled like soup. Caroline watched him, noting the economy of his movements, the way he seemed to fill the small space without effort. There was something about him, a coiled tension, like a wolf pretending to be a dog. "You said I was 5 miles from Thunder Peak," she ventured. "I was trying to reach the Miller cabin. They have a sick child who needs medicine." Elias glanced at her. "You're Doc Morrison's girl?" "No, I'm—" She hesitated. Saying she was the sheriff's daughter might not be wise, not with that gun on the wall and the careful way this man moved. "I help him sometimes, with deliveries and such." He nodded, accepting the half-truth. "The Millers are good people. Their place is about 3 miles south of here, but might as well be 30 in this weather." Caroline's heart sank. Little Sarah Miller was counting on that medicine. "How long do these storms usually last?" "Could be days," Elias said. He ladled soup into a bowl and brought it to her. "You need to eat. Build your strength back up." The soup was simple, venison and wild onions, but it tasted like heaven to Caroline's empty stomach. She ate slowly, aware of Elias watching her from across the room. He'd retreated to lean against the far wall, arms crossed, maintaining that careful distance. "You live here alone?" she asked between spoonfuls. "Yes." "For how long?" "A while." Caroline recognized a wall when she hit one. This man didn't want to talk about himself, which only made her more curious. What kind of man lived alone in the mountains, miles from civilization? "I should thank you," she said instead. "For saving me. I would have died out there." Elias shrugged. Anyone would have done the same. "No," Caroline said quietly. "They wouldn't have?" Their eyes met across the room, and something passed between them. An understanding, perhaps, or maybe just the acknowledgement of a debt owed. Elias looked away first. The day passed slowly. The storm showed no signs of letting up. Caroline dozed fitfully, waking each time to find Elias somewhere in the cabin, tending the fire, mending what looked like a trap, sharpening a knife. He moved quietly for such a large man, and she found herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. By evening, the forced intimacy of the situation was wearing on them both. Caroline had managed to change into the offered clothes, while Elias pointedly stayed outside checking the storm. The pants had to be rolled up several times, and the shirt hung on her like a tent, but they were warm and dry. Her own clothes hung by the fire, a reminder of her other life, the life where she was Marshall Hart's respectable daughter. Not a woman wearing a strange man's clothes in a cabin that might as well be on the moon. "You should take the bed again tonight," Elias said as darkness fell. "I'll sleep by the fire." "I can't keep taking your bed. You've done enough, ma'am," he interrupted, and there was something in his tone that brooked no argument. "You're hurt and you're my guest. You'll take the bed." Caroline wanted to argue. Pride demanded it. But practicality won. Her ankle throbbed, and the bed, narrow as it was better than the floor. As she settled under the blankets, she watched Elias arrange a bedroll near the fireplace. The flickering light played across his features, and she caught glimpses of the man beneath the beard and long hair, a strong jaw, a nose that had been broken at least once, lines around his eyes that spoke of hard living. "Elias," she said softly. He looked up from stoking the fire. "What did you do before you came here?" For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I work cattle, down in Texas, then Wyoming. Honest work for honest pay." His voice held a bitter note, until honest didn't matter anymore. Caroline wanted to ask more, but something in his expression warned her off. She'd pushed enough for one day. "Good night," she said instead. "Good night, ma'am." But sleep didn't come easily. Caroline lay awake listening to the storm batter the cabin walls, thinking about the strange turns life could take. This morning, was it only this morning? She'd been safe in her father's house, worried about nothing more than delivering medicine. Now she was trapped with a man who spoke of honest work in the past tense, who lived like a hermit, who had saved her life but clearly had secrets of his own. She thought about her father, who would have returned from the county seat by now. Marshal Hart was not a man who panicked, but he would be organizing search parties, sending riders in all directions. The thought of his worry made her chest tight. He'd already lost her mother to illness 8 years ago. Caroline was all he had left. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks. In the brief flare of light, Caroline saw Elias lying on his side, facing the fire. His eyes were open, staring into the flames, and the expression on his face was so lonely, so utterly alone, that Caroline felt like an intruder for witnessing it. She closed her eyes, pulling the rough blanket up to her chin. Tomorrow she would find a way home. Tomorrow she would return to her life, her father, her responsibilities. But tonight, trapped by the storm in this small cabin with a stranger who'd shown her more kindness than she had any right to expect, Caroline allowed herself to feel something she rarely indulged in, gratitude for the simple gift of being alive. The wind howled outside, the snow continued to fall, and somewhere in the darkness between sleeping and waking, Caroline heard Elias add another log to the fire, keeping the cold at bay for one more night. By the third day, Caroline had learned the rhythms of the cabin. She woke to the sound of Elias stoking the fire, watched him prepare their simple breakfast of coffee and biscuits, helped where she could despite his protests. Her ankle was improving. She could put weight on it now, though walking any distance was still impossible. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a world transformed. Snow lay thick and pristine in every direction, turning the forest into something from a fairy tale. But the beauty was deceptive. The drifts were chest-deep in places, making travel impossible until the weather warmed enough for the snow to settle and crust over. "Might be another week before you can get out," Elias had said that morning, gazing out at the white expanse. "Maybe 2. Caroline had nodded, trying to hide her conflicting emotions. Part of her was desperate to return home, to ease her father's worry. But another part, a part that surprised and unsettled her, wasn't entirely unhappy about the delay. She'd taken over the cooking, insisting it was the least she could do. Elias had a decent store of supplies: flour, beans, salt pork, dried venison, and even some canned peaches he'd traded for last fall. Caroline made the most of them, drawing on years of helping Martha in the kitchen. "This is good," Elias said one evening, cleaning his plate of the stew she'd made. "Better than anything I've cooked up here." "You've been very kind to me," Caroline said, gathering the dishes. "I hope I can repay you someday." He made that dismissive gesture she'd come to recognize. "No debt between us. Ma'am, just did what anyone would do." "You keep saying that, but it's not true." She limped to the wash basin, aware of his eyes following her. "And I wish you'd call me Caroline. Ma'am makes me feel like my mother." Caroline. He said it slowly, like he was tasting the name. Pretty name. She felt heat rise to her cheeks and busied herself with the dishes. These moments were becoming more frequent, small exchanges that felt weighted with meaning, glances that lingered too long, awareness of each other that filled the small space. That night, after supper, they sat by the fire as had become their custom. Elias was mending a trap, his large hands surprisingly deft with the small tools. Caroline was darning one of his socks, a domestic scene that would have scandalized everyone she knew back in town. "Tell me about your mother," Elias said suddenly. Caroline looked up, startled. He rarely initiated conversation about personal matters. "Why do you want to know?" He shrugged, not looking up from his work. "You mentioned her the other day. Said I made you feel like her when I called you, ma'am. Just wondered." Caroline set down her darning. "She died when I was 15. Lung fever. She was everything my father isn't. Gentle, artistic. She painted, watercolors mostly, birds and flowers." She smiled at the memory. Father never understood her interest in such things, but he loved her anyway. Loved her so much that when she died, part of him died too. I'm sorry, Elias said quietly. She would have liked you, Caroline said without thinking, then blushed furiously. I mean, she always appreciated people who were kind to others. Elias finally looked up, and there was something in his gray eyes that made Caroline's breath catch. You don't know me, Caroline. Not really. If you did, then tell me, she challenged. You know about my life, my family. All I know about you is that you worked cattle and now you live alone in the mountains. That's not a whole person. Elias, that's just facts. He set down the trap, his jaw working like he was chewing on words. Finally, my brother was hanged 4 years ago. In Billings, they said he robbed a bank, killed a guard. But Thomas, he wasn't like that. He was a good man. Had a wife, a little boy. Caroline stayed very still, afraid that any movement might stop the flow of words. I tried to prove his innocence, found witnesses who saw him 20 miles away when that bank was robbed. But the judge, the sheriff, they didn't want to hear it. The real robbers were connected, had friends in high places. His hands clenched into fists. They hanged him anyway, made me watch. Oh, Elias, Caroline breathed. That's not the end of it. His voice had gone hard. 6 months later, I was working for a ranch outside Billings. Good job, good people. Then one day, the sheriff shows up with a warrant, said I'd robbed a stagecoach, shot a passenger. Same week I'd been helping with calving. Dozens of witnesses. Didn't matter. He laughed bitterly. Seems the real robbers needed someone to take the blame, and who better than the brother of an executed criminal, the man who'd been making noise about corruption. So you ran, Caroline said. So I ran. He picked up the trap again, but his hands weren't steady. Been running 3 years now. Built this place. Learned to live off the land. It's not much of a life, but it's honest. More honest than what passes for law in the territories. Caroline rose from her chair and crossed to him, ignoring the protest from her ankle. She knelt beside his chair, placing her hand over his. I believe you. He looked down at her, surprise flickering across his features. Why? You don't know me. I could be lying. Because, Caroline said simply, in 3 days, I've seen who you are. A liar and a thief wouldn't have saved me, wouldn't have cared for me so carefully, so respectfully, wouldn't look so sad when he thinks no one's watching. Elias turned his hand under hers, interlacing their fingers. His hand was rough with calluses, warm and strong. You see too much, he said softly. Maybe you've been alone too long, she countered. They stayed like that for a long moment, hands clasped, the fire crackling beside them. Caroline was acutely aware of every point of contact, his thumb brushing against hers, the pulse she could feel in his wrist, the way his gray eyes had gone dark in the firelight. Caroline, he said, and her name sounded like a prayer on his lips. You should go back to bed. Your ankle. My ankle is fine, she said, but she didn't move. Couldn't move. The air between them had gone electric, charged with possibility. Elias reached out with his free hand, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek, and Caroline leaned into the touch without meaning to. This is dangerous, he whispered. I know, she whispered back. Neither of them moved. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, wind sighed through the pines, and still they stayed frozen, balanced on the edge of something irreversible. It was Elias who finally broke the spell, gently pulling his hand away. You don't understand what you're risking. Your reputation, your future. My reputation? Caroline laughed, but it came out shaky. I've been living in a cabin with a man for 3 days, wearing his clothes, sleeping in his bed. My reputation is already ruined. Elias. No. He stood abruptly, moving away from her. When the snow clears, you'll go home. Tell them you found shelter in an abandoned cabin. Tell them anything but the truth. You'll marry some respectable man, have children, live the life you're supposed to live. Caroline struggled to her feet, anger replacing the softer emotions of moments before. And what about what I want? What if I don't want that life? You don't know what you're saying. He wouldn't look at her. You're young. You've been through an ordeal. Don't! Her voice cut like a blade. Don't diminish what I feel by blaming it on youth or circumstance. I'm not a child. Elias. He turned then, and the look on his face, longing mixed with despair, made her heart clench. No, you're not a child. That's the problem. If you were, this would be easier. They stood on opposite sides of the small cabin, the distance between them feeling like miles. Caroline wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. I should tell you, she said quietly. My father, he's not just anyone. He's Marshal Hart, the sheriff of Redemption Creek. Elias went very still. The sheriff's daughter, he said flatly. Of course you are. It doesn't change anything. It changes everything. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Do you know what would happen if he knew you were here? With me? He'd see me hanged. Caroline? Without trial, without question. Just another outlaw who dared touch his daughter. My father is a fair man. Your father is a lawman. In my experience, that means he follows the law, not justice. And the law says I'm a wanted man. Caroline felt tears prick her eyes. So that's it? We just pretend this never happened? These feelings? What feelings? Elias's voice had gone cold. You're grateful I saved your life. That's all this is. The lie hung between them like a physical thing. Caroline could see the truth in his eyes, in the way his hands clenched at his sides, in the muscle jumping in his jaw. He felt it too, this pull between them, but he was stronger than she was, or perhaps just more afraid. You're right, she said, matching his cold tone. I'm just grateful, nothing more. She turned and limped back to the bed, pulling the curtain he'd rigged for privacy. Behind it, she let the tears fall silently, grieving for something that had barely begun. On the other side of the curtain, she heard Elias moving around, banking the fire, settling into his bedroll. The cabin fell silent except for the wind outside and the settling of logs in the fireplace. Caroline? His voice came soft in the darkness. She didn't answer. I'm sorry, he said, for everything. She pulled the blanket over her head, biting her lip to keep from responding, because if she spoke, she'd tell him the truth, that she wasn't sorry at all, that these 3 days, trapped in a cabin with a wanted man, had been more real, more alive, than all her years in Redemption Creek, that she was falling in love with him, and it was going to break her heart. The morning after their confrontation dawned cold and awkward. Caroline dressed in silence behind the curtain, her movements stiff not just from her healing ankle, but from the tension that filled the cabin like smoke. When she emerged, Elias was already outside, chopping wood with unnecessary vigor. She prepared breakfast mechanically. Coffee, biscuits, some preserved berries she'd found in his stores. When he came back in, snow dusting his shoulders, they ate in silence, carefully avoiding each other's eyes. This went on for 2 days, 2 days of polite distance, of necessary conversation and nothing more. The easy companionship they'd found was gone, replaced by a careful choreography designed to keep them apart in the small space. On the 3rd morning, Caroline couldn't stand it anymore. She was outside gathering kindling, testing her ankle's strength, when she slipped on an icy patch. She went down hard, kindling scattering, a cry escaping before she could stop it. Elias was there in seconds, dropping the bucket of water he'd been carrying, falling to his knees beside her. Are you hurt? Your ankle? I'm fine, she said, but her voice shook, not from pain, but from his nearness, from the concern in his eyes, from his hands on her arms. You're trembling, he said, helping her sit up. I'm cold, she lied. Caroline, just her name, but the way he said it broke something in her. I can't do this anymore, she whispered. This pretending, it's killing me. Elias. His hands stilled on her arms. They were so close she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, could count the lines that pain and weather had carved around them. We have to, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Why? She reached up, touched his face, felt him lean involuntarily into her palm. Because you're afraid? Because I'm the sheriff's daughter? Those are reasons for other people, not for us. Caroline? She silenced him the only way she knew how. She kissed him. For a heartbeat, he was frozen. Then his arms came around her, crushing her against him. And he was kissing her back with 3 days of suppressed longing. The world narrowed to this, his mouth on hers, his hands tangled in her hair, the heat between them that defied the winter cold. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elias rested his forehead against hers. "This is madness," he said. "Yes," she agreed, and kissed him again. Somehow they made it back to the cabin, stumbling through the snow, pausing to kiss against trees, against the door, unable to keep their hands off each other now that the dam had broken. Inside, beside the fire, they came together with a desperation born of days of denial. Elias was gentle despite his strength, reverent despite his need. He touched her like she was something precious, something that might shatter. Caroline had never known such tenderness existed, had never imagined that desire could be mixed with such sweet, aching care. Afterward, they lay entwined on his narrow bed, the blankets pooled around them. Caroline traced the scars on his chest, knife wounds, bullet grazes, the map of a hard life written on his skin. "This one?" she asked, touching a puckered scar near his ribs. "Caught rustlers trying to steal cattle. I was 17. His hand covered hers. "That life seems like a dream now, before Thomas died, before everything went wrong. Tell me about him." "Your brother." Elias pulled her closer, his voice rumbling in his chest where her head lay. "He was 2 years older, always looking out for me, even when I didn't want him to. He taught me to read, you know. Our folks died when we were young, and Thomas made sure I got some schooling." He laughed softly. "He'd have liked you, would have said you were too good for me, and he'd have been right." "Stop that," Caroline said firmly. "I won't have you talking about the man I love that way." The words hung in the air between them. Elias went very still. "You don't mean that," he said finally. Caroline pushed up on her elbow to look at him. "I've never meant anything more in my life." He cupped her face in his hand, thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Caroline Hart, you're going to be the death of me." "No," she said fiercely. "I'm going to be the life of you. We're going to figure this out. Elias, there has to be a way. Your father, I'll talk to him, make him understand. He's a good man, despite what you think. If there's evidence of your innocence, evidence doesn't matter when powerful people want you gone," Elias said bitterly. "I learned that watching them put a rope around my brother's neck." Caroline kissed him, tasting his pain, trying to take it into herself. "Then we'll go somewhere else. California, Oregon, somewhere they can't reach us." "You'd leave everything? Your home, your father, your life?" "What life?" Caroline asked. "Teaching school until some rancher or merchant decides I'd make a good wife, having babies and keeping house and pretending I never wanted anything more?" She shook her head. "That's not living. Elias, this, being here with you, this is living." He pulled her down for another kiss, deeper this time, full of promise and desperation. "When they came up for air," he said, "you make me want to believe it's possible. It is possible. We'll make it possible." They made love again as the afternoon sun slanted through the window, slower this time, learning each other's bodies, memorizing every touch. Caroline had been raised to believe that desire was something shameful, something women endured rather than enjoyed. But there was no shame in this, only a rightness that went bone deep. As evening fell, they sat wrapped in a blanket before the fire, Caroline between Elias's legs, her back against his chest. She'd never felt so safe, so complete. "When I was little," she said, watching the flames dance, "I used to dream about running away, going on adventures like the heroes in my books. My mother would laugh and say I'd grow out of it." She tilted her head back to look at him. "I never did." "And now you want your adventure to be with an outlaw in a cabin," Elias teased gently. "My adventure is you," Caroline said simply. Wherever that leads. He tightened his arms around her. I've been alone so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to hope for something, to want something beyond just surviving another day. You're not alone anymore, Caroline promised. Never again. Outside, it began to snow once more, light flakes that would dust the world clean by morning. But inside the cabin, wrapped in each other in the flickering firelight, Caroline and Elias existed in their own world, a world where the past couldn't reach them and the future was theirs to write. That night, they talked until dawn, about everything and nothing, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Elias told her about the places he'd been, the things he'd seen in his wandering. Caroline shared her frustrations with the narrow confines of a woman's life in a frontier town, her secret dreams of writing, of creating something that mattered. You could write our story, Elias suggested, pressing a kiss to her temple. The sheriff's daughter and the outlaw. No one would believe it. Caroline laughed. Too scandalous. The best stories always are, he said, as the sun rose, painting the snow-covered world in shades of pink and gold. They finally slept, wrapped so tightly together it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. In sleep, Elias's face lost its guarded wariness, and Caroline could see the man he might have been if life had been kinder. She knew the real world waited outside their door, knew that soon the snow would melt enough for travel, and decisions would have to be made. Her father would be frantic with worry. The town would be searching, and Elias was still a wanted man, no matter how much she loved him. But for now, for these precious stolen hours, none of that mattered. They had found each other against all odds, in the midst of a storm that should have killed her. If that wasn't fate, Caroline didn't know what was. She pressed closer to Elias, feeling his heartbeat against her back. Steady and strong, whatever came next, they would face it together. Love had found them in the most unlikely place, and she would fight to keep it with every breath in her body. Outside, the world was white and waiting, but inside, in their small circle of warmth and love, Caroline and Elias had found their own redemption. The thaw came slowly, reluctantly, as if the mountain itself wanted to keep them safe in their hidden sanctuary. Water dripped from icicles, and patches of brown earth began to show through the white. With each passing day, the reality of their situation pressed closer. We need to make a plan, Caroline said one morning, watching Elias check his traps. The ease between them was still there, but shadowed now by the knowledge that their time was running short. The plan is simple, Elias replied, not meeting her eyes. Once the trail is clear, you go home. Tell them you found shelter. Leave out the details. Life goes on. Without you? Caroline's voice was sharp. That's not a plan. That's giving up. He finally looked at her, and the resignation in his eyes made her heart clench. What would you have me do? Ride into town and turn myself in? Hope your father's sense of justice outweighs a wanted poster? Yes, Caroline said firmly. That's exactly what we'll do. Together. Their first real fight erupted then. Voices raised in the small cabin. Elias was adamant. He wouldn't put her reputation or safety at risk. Caroline was equally stubborn. She wouldn't abandon him to a life of running. You don't understand what you're asking, Elias said, pacing like a caged wolf. Even if your father believed me, which he won't, there are bounty hunters, other lawmen. The warrant on me isn't just local. Caroline, it goes all the way to the territorial government. Then we leave, she insisted. Tonight. Head west. With what? He gestured around the sparse cabin. I have maybe $20 saved. No horses, no supplies for that kind of journey. And you'd be leaving everything. I don't care about things, Caroline shouted. I care about you. The fight might have continued, but it was interrupted by a sound that made them both freeze. Horses, picking their way up the mountain trail. Elias moved instantly, grabbing his gun belt from its hook. Get behind the bed, he ordered, his entire demeanor changing. Gone was the gentle lover. In his place stood the man who'd survived 3 years as an outlaw. Elias, no, do it! The command in his voice brooked no argument. Caroline scrambled behind the bed as Elias positioned himself by the window. Gun drawn. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was how it would end, in violence and blood. Everything she'd feared. The horses drew closer. Elias cocked his revolver. The click loud in the silence. Then a voice called out, "Hello, the cabin. Anyone there? We're looking for a missing woman." Caroline recognized the voice. Deputy Sam Richards, one of her father's men. Relief and terror warred in her chest. "Caroline Hart," another voice, this one belonging to Dr. Morrison. "Miss Hart, if you can hear us, please respond." She looked at Elias. He stood frozen, gun still raised, jaw clenched. Slowly, he nodded. "I'm here," Caroline called, her voice shaky. "I'm all right." The relief in the men's voices was palpable. "Thank the Lord, your father's been beside himself. Is it safe to approach?" Elias was already moving, shoving his few possessions into a pack. Caroline grabbed his arm. "What are you doing?" "Getting ready to run," he said tersely. "They'll come in, see you're safe, notice things, 2 plates, 2 cups. Questions will be asked. Then we tell them the truth." He pulled free of her grip. "The truth will see me hanged." "Elias, please!" The door burst open. Deputy Richards entered first, rifle raised, taking in the scene, Caroline in men's clothing, Elias with a gun in his hand. For a moment that stretched like eternity. Nobody moved. "Drop the weapon," Richards ordered. Elias complied slowly, setting his Colt on the table. His eyes never left Caroline's face. "Doctor." Morrison pushed past the deputy. "Caroline, thank God you're safe. Your ankle, how bad is it?" "It's healing," she said numbly, watching Richards approach Elias with shackles. "Who are you, mister?" the deputy demanded. Elias said nothing, but Caroline saw recognition dawn in Richards' eyes. The deputy had been studying wanted posters for years. "Crow," Richards breathed. "Elias Crow." "Well, I'll be damned." "He saved my life," Caroline said quickly. "I would have frozen to death if not for him." "That may be, miss, but he's wanted for robbery and murder." Richards was already fastening the shackles around Elias's wrists. "There's a $1,000 bounty on his head." "He's innocent," the words tore from Caroline's throat. "He was framed, just like his brother." "Caroline," Elias's voice was quiet, resigned. "Don't. I won't let them take you. Doctor." Morrison put a restraining hand on her shoulder. "Miss Hart, you've been through an ordeal. You're not thinking clearly." She shoved his hand away. "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in my entire life. This man is innocent, and I can prove it." "How?" Richards challenged. Caroline's mind raced. "The ranch where he worked, there'll be records, witnesses. The dates won't match. And the stagecoach robbery, check the passenger manifest. I'd wager real money one of them was connected to whoever really did it. Needed someone to blame." "That's quite a theory, miss," Richards said doubtfully. "But it's not my job to investigate. My job is to bring in wanted men." "Then I'm coming with you," Caroline declared. All 3 men started to protest, but she cut them off. "I'm the sheriff's daughter. I was rescued by this man. I'm a witness to his character. Where he goes, I go." The journey back to Redemption Creek was a nightmare. Caroline rode behind Dr. Morrison, her ankle still too weak for her to manage a horse alone. Elias rode with his hands shackled to his saddle horn. Richard's rifle trained on him constantly. They dressed Caroline in a spare coat and hat Morrison had brought, but she still felt exposed, vulnerable, not from the cold, but from the stares of the men, the questions in their eyes. A woman spending a week alone with a man, any man, was scandal enough. That the man was a wanted outlaw made it worse. Elias wouldn't look at her. He kept his eyes forward, his face carved from stone. Only the muscle jumping in his jaw betrayed his tension. They camped that night halfway down the mountain. Richards kept Elias shackled to a tree, despite Caroline's protests. She managed to bring him water, kneeling beside him while the deputy watched suspiciously. "I'm going to fix this," she whispered. "You're going to get yourself hurt." Elias replied, equally quiet. Let it go, Caroline. Please, for me. Would you let it go if it were me? She challenged. His silence was answer enough. The next morning brought fresh disaster. They'd barely broken camp when more riders appeared. Bounty hunters, drawn by news of the captured outlaw worth $1,000. That's our prisoner, Deputy. The lead hunter said. He was a rough-looking man with cold eyes and a scattergun across his saddle. We've been tracking him for months. He's in my custody. Richards replied firmly. You'll get your bounty when he's properly tried and convicted. Trials take time, another hunter said. Sometimes prisoners try to escape. Tragic when they get shot in the attempt. The threat was barely veiled. Caroline saw Elias tense, calculating odds, distances. She moved her horse closer to his. Anyone who touches this man will answer to my father, she said clearly. Sheriff Marshal Hart doesn't take kindly to vigilante justice in his jurisdiction. The lead hunter's eyes flicked to her, taking in her fine features, her protective position near Elias. His smile was knowing and ugly. Well, the sheriff's daughter, defending an outlaw. That's quite a story. Wonder what else happened up in that cabin? Caroline's face burned, but she didn't back down. What happened is that an innocent man saved my life, and I'll testify to that in court. Innocent? The hunter scoffed. Lady, there ain't no innocent men, just ones that ain't been caught yet. The tension crackled between the two groups. Caroline counted 5 hunters to their 3, and Morrison wasn't a fighting man. If violence erupted, riders coming, one of the hunters announced. Over the rise came a group of men, riding hard. At their head, Caroline's heart leaped, rode her father. Marshal Hart was a big man, still powerful at 50, with iron-gray hair and the bearing of someone used to command. His eyes went first to Caroline, checking for injury, then to Elias, then to the hunters. Gentlemen, he said mildly, but his hand rested on his gun. I'll thank you to move along. This is my prisoner now. Sheriff, the lead hunter protested. We've got legal claim. You've got nothing but greed. Marshal cut him off. Richards, get these men out of my sight before I arrest them for interfering with the law. The hunters grumbled but backed down. Few men were willing to cross Marshal Hart in his own territory. When they were gone, Marshal dismounted and went straight to Caroline. Baby girl, he said softly. Are you hurt? I'm fine, Papa, she said, falling into his arms. But you have to listen to me. Elias, Mr. Crow, he's innocent. He saved me, cared for me. Shh. Her father held her tight, but his eyes over her shoulder were cold as they fixed on Elias. We'll sort this out back in town. Papa, please? Back in town, he repeated firmly. Then, louder. Mount up. We're burning daylight. As they prepared to ride out, Caroline caught her father's sleeve. Papa, promise me you'll investigate. Really investigate. Not just... I'll do my job, Marshal said. I always do. But Caroline... His voice dropped. Whatever happened up there, whatever you think you feel, it's not real. You are vulnerable, scared. Men like him, they know how to take advantage. You're wrong, Caroline said fiercely. You don't know him. I know enough. Her father replied, He's wanted for murder. That's all I need to know. As they rode toward Redemption Creek, Caroline's mind churned. She'd promised Elias she would save him. But how? Her father was fair but rigid when it came to the law. The evidence against Elias was old but official. And hanging over everything was the scandal of their time together, the assumptions people would make. She looked ahead to where Elias rode, straight-backed despite his shackles. Even now, facing probable death, he carried himself with dignity. She loved him more in that moment than ever, loved his strength, his courage, his stubborn honor. The town appeared ahead, and Caroline squared her shoulders. She'd fought a blizzard and won. She'd found love in the most unlikely place. Now she had to fight the law itself, and she'd be damned if she'd lose. The jail in Redemption Creek was a squat stone building that squatted next to the sheriff's office like a guilty conscience. Caroline stood outside it in the pre-dawn darkness, a basket of food in her hands, gathering courage for what had become a nightly ritual. 2 weeks had passed since they'd brought Elias back. 2 weeks of her father's cold silences, of whispers following her through town, of doors closing in her face. The scandal was everything she'd expected and worse. Respectable women crossed the street to avoid her. Men looked at her with knowing eyes that made her skin crawl. But Caroline endured it all for the moments she could spend with Elias. "You're early tonight," Deputy Richards said when she entered. He'd grown used to her visits, even sympathetic. "Your father know you're here?" "My father knows I'm stubborn," Caroline replied. "Has he eaten?" "Not much. Never does." Richards unlocked the door to the cells. 15 minutes. "Miss Hart, that's all I can give you." Elias was sitting on his narrow cot, staring at the small barred window. He looked thinner, the shadows under his eyes deeper. When he saw her, something flickered across his face. Joy, pain, resignation, all mixed together. "You shouldn't keep coming here," he said, as he did every night. "And you should eat," she countered, unpacking the basket. Fresh bread, stew still warm, apple pie from Martha's oven. "Martha sends her regards. She doesn't believe you're guilty either." "Martha's a good woman." He accepted the food but set it aside, reaching through the bars to take her hands instead. "How bad was it today?" Caroline tried to smile. "Mrs. Pritchard called me a Jezebel in the middle of the general store. So that was educational." "Caroline, don't," she squeezed his hands. "Don't apologize for other people's small minds. Now eat and tell me about the lawyer." The territorial judge had appointed Elias a defender, a young man named Theodore Hartwell, fresh from law school back east. Caroline had met with him repeatedly, sharing every detail Elias had told her about the frame-up, the connections between the real criminals and local officials. "He's eager," Elias said, finally taking a bite of bread. "Maybe too eager. Keeps talking about making a name for himself with this case." "Good. Let him, as long as he gets you free." "And then what?" Elias asked quietly. "Even if by some miracle I'm acquitted, you think this town will accept us? Think your father will shake my hand and welcome me to Sunday dinner? I don't care what anyone accepts," Caroline said fiercely. "We'll go somewhere else. Start fresh." "With what?" "I've got nothing to offer you. Caroline, no money, no prospects, no good name. You have yourself." She interrupted. "That's all I want." He brought her hands to his lips, kissing each palm. "You deserve better. I deserve the truth," she said. "And the truth is, I love you. That won't change whether you're in this cell or free, whether we're in Redemption Creek or California or the moon itself." They talked quietly until Richards knocked. Signaling time was up, as always. Leaving was agony. Caroline pressed her face against the bars, and Elias kissed her as best he could within the constraints of iron and space. "I love you," she whispered. "Don't give up. Promise me." "I promise," he said, but his eyes were sad. Outside, Caroline nearly collided with her father. Marshall Hart stood like a mountain in the darkness, his face unreadable. "Every night, Caroline," he said, "do you have any idea what people are saying?" "I know exactly what they're saying," she replied, lifting her chin. "And I don't care. You should care. Your reputation—" "My reputation was ruined the moment I spent a night under Elias's roof," Caroline said bluntly. "So I might as well be hanged for a sheep as a lamb." Her father flinched at her choice of words. "Don't talk about hanging so lightly. That's what waits for him if he's convicted." "Then investigate." Caroline's composure cracked. "You're the sheriff. Papa, do your job. The ranch where he worked. Wire them. Get statements. The dates don't match. I know they don't. And the stagecoach passengers, one of them has to be connected to whoever really—" "Enough!" Marshall's voice was sharp. "You think I haven't been investigating? You think I want to see you mooning over a condemned man?" Caroline went still. "You have been investigating?" Her father sighed, suddenly looking older. "I'm a lawman, Caroline. I follow evidence, not feelings. And yes, I've been looking into Crow's claims. And And it's complicated. The ranch confirmed he was working there during the robbery, but records can be forged, witnesses bought. The prosecutor says, the prosecutor wants a conviction. Caroline interrupted. Any conviction? Papa, you know Elias is innocent. I can see it in your eyes. Marshall was quiet for a long moment. What I know and what I can prove in court are different things. There are powerful people who want Elias Crow to hang. Caroline, people with influence all the way to the territorial capital. The same people who framed him. Probably, but suspicion isn't proof. Then find proof. Caroline grabbed her father's hands. Papa, please. I know you don't approve. I know you think I'm young and foolish. But I love him. And if he hangs, her voice broke. If he hangs, part of me will die with him. Marshall pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried. Oh, baby girl, why him, of all the men in this territory? Why did it have to be him? I didn't choose it, Caroline said against his chest. It just happened. He saved me. Papa, not just from the storm, from a life half-lived. Please, help me save him in return. Her father was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, there might be a way. It's dangerous. Probably illegal, certainly stupid. But there might be a way. Caroline pulled back to look at him. What kind of way? The territorial prosecutor. Aldrich, I've suspected for years he's corrupt. Taking bribes, manipulating cases. If I could prove it. Show that he's part of the conspiracy against Crow. How? There's a man in the territorial prison. Jake Morley. He was part of the gang that robbed that stagecoach. Caught 6 months after Elias ran. He's been trying to make a deal. Claims he has information about who really ordered the robbery. Then why hasn't anyone listened? Because Aldrich made sure he couldn't talk. Had him transferred to solitary. No visitors. But I have a friend there. A guard who owes me favors. Marshall looked grim. If I could get to Morley, get his testimony, it would prove Elias is innocent. Caroline breathed. Maybe. Or maybe Morley's lying to save his own skin. Either way, it means a 2-day ride to the territorial prison. And if Aldrich finds out what I'm doing, he'll try to stop you. Caroline finished. Maybe violently. Almost certainly violently. Marshall studied his daughter's face. This is what you want? For me to risk everything on the word of an outlaw? I want you to risk everything for justice, Caroline said. And for me. Marshall nodded slowly. Then God help us both. I'll leave at dawn. Tell no one, not even Martha, as far as anyone knows. I'm checking on rustling reports near the border. What about Elias? His trial starts in 3 days. Then I'll have to ride fast. He kissed her forehead. Keep your head down while I'm gone. Visit him if you must, but be careful. If Aldrich suspects we're moving against him, I'll be careful. Caroline promised, but careful was relative. The next morning, with her father gone, Caroline put on her best dress and marched into Theodore Hartwell's law office. Miss Hart! The young lawyer jumped to his feet, scattering papers. I wasn't expecting. We need to talk strategy. Caroline interrupted. My father's investigating new evidence, but we need to delay the trial if possible. Give him time to return. Delay? Hartwell looked nervous. On what grounds? You're the lawyer. Think of something. Caroline sat down, uninvited. And I want to review all the evidence against Elias. Every witness statement, every document. Miss Hart, I appreciate your concern, but Mr. Hartwell. Caroline's voice could have cut glass. The man I love is facing the gallows. I've already lost my reputation defending him. I have nothing left to lose except him. So you can help me, or you can explain to the town why you refuse to assist Sheriff Hart's daughter in pursuing justice. Your choice. The lawyer swallowed hard. What exactly did you have in mind? They worked through the day. Caroline's sharp mind catching inconsistencies Hartwell had missed. The witness who claimed to see Elias rob the stagecoach, his description didn't match. The timeline was wrong. The stolen money had never been recovered, despite searches of Elias's known haunts. It's all circumstantial, Hartwell admitted as evening fell. But together, it might create reasonable doubt. We need more than doubt. Caroline said. "We need proof of conspiracy." That proof, she prayed, was riding hard toward the territorial prison with her father. But Marshall Hart wasn't the only one making moves in this dangerous game. That night, as Caroline prepared for her visit to Elias, she found a note slipped under her door. "Stop digging or he hangs tonight. No trial, no goodbye, just a rope and a tree. Your choice." Caroline's hands shook as she read it. They were threatening a lynching. The proper thing to do would be to show Richards, raise the alarm, but that might provoke exactly what the note threatened. Instead, she tucked the note into her bodice and walked to the jail with her head high. If they wanted to frighten her, they'd chosen the wrong woman. She'd faced down a blizzard and won. She'd defied convention for love. She'd be damned if she'd bow to cowards who hid behind anonymous threats. But as she sat with Elias that night, holding his hands through the bars, Caroline couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Somewhere in the darkness, forces were aligning against them. Her father had 2 days to find proof and return. 2 days before the trial that would likely end in a death sentence. 2 days to save the man she loved. Caroline kissed Elias goodbye and walked out into the night, the note burning against her heart. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd take the fight to them. If they wanted to threaten her, they'd learn what Sheriff Hart's daughter was truly made of. The game was far from over. The courthouse was packed on the morning of Elias Crow's trial. Every seat filled. People standing along the walls, more crowding outside the windows. Caroline sat in the front row, her back straight, ignoring the whispers and stares. Martha sat beside her, a steadying presence in the sea of hostile faces. 2 days had passed with no word from her father. Hartwell had managed to delay the trial by only 1 day, claiming he needed time to review new evidence. But now, time had run out. Elias was brought in, shackled hand and foot. His eyes found Caroline immediately, and she saw him try to smile reassuringly. She lifted her chin, refusing to show the fear that gnawed at her insides. Judge Abraham Foster, a stern man with a reputation for harsh sentences, called the court to order. The prosecutor, William Aldrich, rose with the confidence of a man who knew the outcome was predetermined. "Gentlemen of the jury," Aldrich began, his voice oily with false sincerity, "we are here to see justice done for a heinous crime, the robbery of the overland stage and the murder of passenger Harold Westbrook." Caroline's hands clenched in her lap. Harold Westbrook. She'd had Hartwell investigate that name. A businessman with interests in mining, banking, and, significantly, political connections to several territorial judges. The prosecution's case was swift and damning. Witnesses testified to seeing Elias near the robbery site, never mind that their descriptions varied wildly. The wanted poster was presented with flourish. The fact that Elias had run was emphasized repeatedly. "Flight is evidence of guilt," Aldrich intoned. "An innocent man stands and fights. A guilty man runs." When Hartwell rose for the defense, he looked impossibly young facing Aldrich's seasoned presence. But his voice was steady as he began to dismantle the prosecution's case, piece by piece. "Gentlemen, I ask you to consider the facts, not the assumptions. Mr. Crow was 70 miles away at the Broken Arrow Ranch on the day of the robbery. I have here sworn statements from 15 ranch hands. Statements that could easily be falsified." Aldrich interrupted, as could witness testimonies. Hartwell shot back, "Especially when those witnesses can't agree on whether the robber was tall or short, bearded or clean-shaven, young or old." Caroline watched the jury, trying to gauge their reactions. Some looked thoughtful, but others had the closed expressions of men who'd already made up their minds. Then Hartwell called his star witness, Caroline herself. A ripple of excitement ran through the courtroom as she took the stand. She could feel the weight of every eye, the judgment in them. Fallen woman, Jezebel, whore. The words seemed to hang in the air like smoke. "Miss Hart," Hartwell began carefully, "please tell the court about your experiences with the defendant." Caroline looked directly at the jury as she spoke. "Mr. Crow saved my life. I was lost in a blizzard, injured, freezing to death. He could have left me. A stranger meant nothing to him. Instead, he risked exposure to carry me to safety. He tended my injuries with utmost propriety and respect. And during your time in his cabin, Hartwell continued, did Mr. Crow speak of his past? He did. He told me about his brother, Thomas, who was wrongly hanged for a crime he didn't commit. He told me how he himself was framed months later by the same people who needed a scapegoat. Objection! Aldrich was on his feet. Hearsay and speculation. Sustained. Judge Foster ruled. The jury will disregard. Then let me speak to what I observed. Caroline interrupted, earning a sharp look from the judge. I observed a man who lives honestly, who works hard for what little he has. I observed someone who showed me kindness without expectation of reward. You observed a criminal who seduced you. Aldrich's voice cut through hers. Who took advantage of your vulnerability? Tell me, Miss Hart, did this man share your bed? The courtroom erupted. Caroline felt her face burn, but she kept her eyes steady on Aldrich. My relationship with Mr. Crow is not on trial here, but it speaks to your reliability as a witness. Aldrich pressed. A woman in love will say anything. A woman in love will tell the truth. Caroline stood, despite the judge's gavel pounding. Yes, I love Elias Crow. I love him because I know him, because I've seen his heart, and I would rather be known as a fallen woman who stands by an innocent man than a respectable lady who lets an innocent man hang. The judge finally restored order, dismissing Caroline from the stand. As she walked back to her seat on shaking legs, she caught Elias's eyes. The love and pride in them made everything else fade away. The trial continued, but Caroline barely heard it. Her mind was on her father, somewhere on the road, racing against time. She'd done what she could. Now it was up to fate. As closing arguments began, a commotion erupted outside. Horses riding hard, shouts. The courtroom doors burst open, and Marshal Hart strode in, dusty and travel-worn, with 2 territorial marshals flanking him. Your Honor, Marshal's voice boomed. I request an immediate stay of proceedings. I have evidence that will expose a conspiracy reaching to the highest levels of territorial government. Judge Foster's face went pale. Aldrich jumped to his feet. This is highly irregular. Sit down, Aldrich, one of the territorial marshals ordered. You're under arrest for corruption, conspiracy, and perverting the course of justice. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Caroline pushed through the crowd to reach her father. Papa, you did it! Not just me, Marshall said, producing a sealed document. Jake Morley sang like a bird. Named names, dates, amounts, the whole corrupt network, including who really ordered that stagecoach robbery and why. Let me guess, Caroline said. Someone who wanted Harold Westbrook dead and needed a scapegoat. Westbrook was going to testify about illegal mining claims. Very powerful people wanted him silenced. Marshall raised his voice. Your Honor, I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against Elias Crow. What followed was swift. Morley's testimony, verified by the territorial marshals, exposed a web of corruption that had ensnared dozens of innocent men, including Thomas Crow. The real stagecoach robbers were already in custody, one of them a cousin of Aldrich himself. When Judge Foster pronounced Elias a free man, Caroline thought her heart would burst. She ran to him as the shackles were removed, not caring about propriety or the watching crowd. He caught her, lifting her off her feet, burying his face in her hair. It's over, she whispered. You're free. No, he said softly. I'm yours. There's a difference. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some cheered. There were more people sympathetic to their story than Caroline had realized. Others muttered darkly about corruption and conspiracies. But none of that mattered. Elias was free. Outside the courthouse, in the bright mountain sunshine, Marshal Hart faced the man his daughter loved. Mr. Crow, he said formally. Sheriff Hart, Elias replied, equally formal. They studied each other, the lawman and the former outlaw, the protective father and the man who'd stolen his daughter's heart. Finally, Marshall extended his hand. Seems I owe you an apology, and my thanks. You saved Caroline's life. Elias shook his hand firmly. She saved mine right back, sir, in more ways than one. Papa, Caroline said, taking both their arms. Does this mean? Marshall sighed deeply. I won't pretend I'm happy about this. You could have any man in the territory. Caroline, why you had to choose one who's been living rough in the mountains for 3 years? Because he's the best man I know. Caroline said simply, present company included? But Marshall's stern expression softened slightly. You planning to marry my daughter, Crow? If she'll have me. Elias said, though I've got nothing to offer but myself. That's not true. Marshall said, there's reward money for exposing Aldrich's conspiracy. Enough to buy land, build a house, start fresh. The territorial governor wants to make an example. Show that justice still means something out here. Caroline looked between the 2 men she loved most. Then we can stay? Here in Redemption Creek? Won't be easy, Marshall warned. People have long memories. People also love a good redemption story, Martha said. Joining them, she smiled at Elias. And I make a mighty fine wedding cake, if anyone's interested. Elias turned to Caroline, dropping to one knee right there in the dusty street. Caroline Hart, you fought the whole world for me. You believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. Will you marry me? Yes, Caroline said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He stood and kissed her, there in front of God and everyone. Some people cheered, others turned away in disgust. But Caroline didn't care. She'd found her adventure, her purpose, her love. The scandal would follow them for years. There would always be whispers. Always be those who remembered the sheriff's daughter who fell in love with an outlaw in a snowbound cabin. But there would also be those who remembered the truth that came to light, the corruption exposed, the innocent men freed because 2 people refused to let injustice stand. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Caroline stood with Elias on the edge of town, looking up at Thunder Peak. No regrets? Elias asked, his arm around her waist. None, Caroline said firmly. Though I do have one request. Anything. Can we keep the cabin? Fix it up. Use it as a hunting lodge. I have some very fond memories of that place. Elias laughed. The sound, rich and free. Woman, you nearly died getting to that cabin, but I didn't, Caroline pointed out. Instead, I found you. I'd say that storm was the best thing that ever happened to me. He kissed her temple. Remind me to thank the blizzard in our wedding vows. They stood together, watching the mountains turn purple in the dying light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be a wedding to plan, a life to build, a community to slowly win over. But tonight, they were simply 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had fought for love and won. In the distance, thunder rumbled over the peaks, promising more snow. But Caroline wasn't afraid. She had survived the storm once. With Elias by her side, she could weather anything. The first snow of winter fell on the day Caroline and Elias Crow were married. Fat, lazy flakes drifted down from a pearl gray sky, dusting the small wedding party gathered in the meadow where their cabin stood. It had been a year since that fateful blizzard brought them together. A year of hard work, gradual acceptance, and building a life from the ground up. The old cabin had been expanded and improved, transformed from a hermit's shelter into a proper home. Glass windows replaced the oiled cloth. A proper floor covered the packed earth, and a second room had been added for the children they hoped would come. Caroline stood before the minister in a simple white dress she'd made herself, her mother's wedding veil covering her golden hair. Elias wore his first new suit, looking uncomfortable but handsome, his gray eyes never leaving her face. The wedding party was small but meaningful. Marshall Hart stood as Elias's best man, a gesture that had surprised everyone, including Elias himself. Martha was Caroline's matron of honor, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Doc Morrison had come, along with Deputy Richards and his wife. Even some of the ranch hands from the Broken Arrow were there, men who'd testified to Elias's innocence and now counted him as a friend. Dearly beloved, Reverend Wilson began, his voice carrying across the meadow. We gather here, in sight of God and these mountains, to join this man and woman in holy matrimony." Caroline barely heard the familiar words. She was lost in Elias's eyes, remembering everything that had brought them to this moment. The storm, the cabin, the trial, the long months of proving themselves to a skeptical town. It hadn't been easy. There were still those who crossed the street when they saw her coming, who whispered behind their hands about the sheriff's daughter who'd lived in sin with an outlaw. But there were more who'd come to respect them. Elias had used the reward money wisely, buying land adjacent to their mountain property and starting a small ranch. He worked harder than any two men, determined to prove himself worthy of the second chance he'd been given. Caroline had returned to teaching, ignoring the initial protests of some parents. Her students loved her, and gradually, even the doubters had to admit she was good at what she did. "The rings?" Reverend Wilson prompted. Marshall produced 2 simple gold bands. They couldn't afford anything fancy, but Caroline wouldn't have wanted it anyway. The rings were perfect, honest, and true, like their love. "Elias," Caroline said, sliding the ring onto his finger. "I give you this ring as a symbol of my love and devotion. I promise to stand by you in storm and sunshine, in plenty and in want, in joy and in sorrow. You saved my life, but more than that, you gave it meaning. I choose you, today and always." Elias's hands were steady as he took her ring, but his voice was rough with emotion. "Caroline, I give you this ring as a promise to love you, protect you, and cherish you all the days of my life. You saw the man I could be when I'd forgotten him myself. You fought for me when I had no fight left. You are my redemption, my hope, my home. I choose you, today and always." "What God has joined together," Reverend Wilson intoned, "let no man put asunder. I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Elias cupped Caroline's face in his hands, kissing her with a tenderness that brought tears to Martha's eyes. Around them, snow continued to fall, blessing their union with its pure white grace. The reception was held in the barn they'd built that summer, transformed with lanterns and pine boughs into something magical. Martha had outdone herself with the food: venison stew, fresh bread, vegetables from Caroline's garden, and a wedding cake decorated with sugar flowers. "Never thought I'd see the day," Deputy Richards said, raising his glass in a toast. "Elias Crow, respectable married man. Never thought I'd see it either," Elias admitted, his arm around Caroline's waist. "Just goes to show, miracles do happen." "2 miracles," Marshall Hart said, raising his own glass. "And to my daughter, who never met a fight she wouldn't take on, even when that fight was her old man." The party laughed, the tension of the past year easing into genuine celebration. Caroline watched her father and husband talking together by the fire, marveling at how far they'd all come. Marshall would never fully understand her choice, but he'd come to respect Elias, even rely on him. When rustlers had hit the valley that fall, it was Elias who'd helped track them down, his knowledge of the mountain trails proving invaluable. As the evening wore on, the guests gradually departed, leaving the newlyweds alone in their cabin. Caroline stood by the window, watching the snow fall, remembering another snowy night that seemed a lifetime ago. "What are you thinking?" Elias asked, coming up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "About that first night," she said, leaning back against him. "How scared I was when I woke up here. How you stayed so far away, so careful not to frighten me. And now?" She turned in his arms, smiling up at him. "Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." They stood together, swaying slightly, dancing to music only they could hear. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm shadows on the walls they'd built together. On the mantel sat Caroline's mother's painting, a watercolor of birds in flight that Marshall had given them as a wedding gift. Below it, Elias's old colt hung peacefully, a reminder of harder times now past. "I have something for you," Elias said, producing a small wrapped package. Caroline opened it to find a leather-bound journal, its pages clean and waiting. "Oh, Elias, you said once you wanted to write," he reminded her. Thought maybe you could start with our story, the real one, not the gossip version. The Sheriff's Daughter and the Outlaw. Caroline mused, running her fingers over the smooth leather. Who would believe it? Who cares if they believe it? Elias said, It's our truth. Later, as they lay together in their bed, in their home, beginning their life, Caroline traced the scars on Elias's chest, marveling at how familiar they'd become. Do you ever miss it? She asked. The solitude? The freedom? I wasn't free? Elias said quietly. I was hiding. There's a difference. He captured her hand, pressing it flat against his heart. This is freedom. This is home. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing their small ranch in pristine white. Come morning, there would be chores to do, a life to build, a community to continue winning over. There would be hard times ahead, harsh winters, dry summers, the inevitable struggles of frontier life. But there would also be joy. Children, God willing, harvests and holidays, quiet evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other, Sunday dinners with Marshall and Martha. The slow, steady building of a good life, an honest life, a life worth living. I love you, Mrs. Crow, Elias murmured against her hair. I love you too, Mr. Crow, Caroline replied, snuggling closer. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows, but the cabin stood strong against it. It had weathered worse storms, sheltered greater dangers. Now it would shelter their love, their dreams, their future. 5 years later, Caroline would publish her book, Love in the Time of Blizzards, a true tale of the Montana Territory. It would scandalize some and inspire others. Women would write to her from across the country, sharing their own stories of choosing love over convention. 10 years later, Elias would be elected as Redemption Creek's sheriff when Marshall retired, the former outlaw becoming the town's most respected lawman. The irony would not be lost on anyone. 20 years later, their daughter Mary would fall in love with a traveling newspaper man, scandalizing the town all over again. Caroline and Elias would share knowing looks and welcome the young man with open arms, understanding that love rarely follows conventional paths. But all of that was still to come. Tonight, on their wedding night, with snow falling soft as blessings outside, Caroline and Elias had everything they needed. They had survived the storm, literal and figurative. They had fought for their love and won. They had found redemption in each other's arms. The girl who'd ridden out to deliver medicine, who'd gotten lost in a blizzard and found her heart's desire, she was gone. In her place was a woman who knew that sometimes getting lost is the only way to find where you truly belong. And the outlaw who'd saved her? He'd discovered that salvation works both ways, that sometimes the person you save ends up saving you right back. That love, real love, is worth more than gold, stronger than iron bars, and more enduring than the mountains themselves. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering their tracks, hiding their past, blessing their future with its clean, white promise. And in the cabin that had brought them together, two hearts beat as one, writing their own ending to a story that had begun in a storm. It was, as these things go, a very good ending indeed, the kind that's really just a beginning in disguise. Thank you for listening to this tale of love, redemption, and courage in the Wild West. I hope Caroline and Elias's story touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it with you. Where are you listening to this story from? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to connect with fellow Western romance enthusiasts from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more tales of frontier love and adventure. What did you think of Caroline's brave fight for the man she loved? Share your thoughts below.